So as you probably noticed, we're not in the studio today, and we're gonna enjoy the fact that I'm on a Greek island with no restrictions to fly whatsoever anywhere around me to talk a little bit about drones and more specifically about active tracking. Is one of the automatic modes that the drone has to simply follow you around in a way that you don't actually have to physically control it to do the movements and follow some sort of object or a person.
Or a way in which the drone controls the camera for you so that you can do more complicated movements.
More specifically, I'm going to be using the DJI Air 2S, and it has 3 different modes: active tracking, spotlight and point of interest. Each drone on the DJI lineup has different modes available, but the general concept of how it works is more or less the same. And the active tracking itself is going to be very similar across the board. Let's go. So we have the drone in the air. Let's see now what can we do.
By the way, hi, I'm Henry, and in this channel I help you with the tech tools to be creative, and here likes are for free, so just grab yours and let's continue. Okay, so first let's tackle Spotlight, because it's the main one that the drone will always revert to. Now actually, to begin using any of these modes, you just have to drag your finger across the screen and try to select what's the object you want to follow. And the drone will try its best to try to understand if it's a person, a boat or a car, whatever. But it can also be whatever object, and to make it easier for the drone, you have to find a balance between the size of your target and also the color contrast. Now the size is important because when the drone gets away a little bit, it might not understand anymore what is the object and what is the background. But also if you choose something that is very big in the frame, it gets a little bit confused about what parts it should actually have in the center. So you're gonna have to pick something that is in between these two sizes, and it will depend on the object itself. So you're gonna need some experimentation in the first seconds just to be sure that it's tracking correctly. And also if the target is gonna be just whatever object on the face of a building or something like that, the more you choose something that has some color contrast with the rest, the easier it's going to be. So instead of trying to select a plain wall, try to select a window, for example. Or trying to select just the beach itself, try to select an umbrella. And in this mode, you're gonna see that if you're filming yourself and you don't use the controller for anything, the drone is just going to hover, but it's going to turn around to look at you and have you centered in the frame. Or if you're tracking something else, now you can move the drone freely and the camera will always be pointing to the target. And now this is really cool, because especially if you pair this with the cine mode in which the drone moves a little bit slower, you're gonna be able to do very complicated movements around the target. Like for example, spiraling around something or going sideways and upwards or downwards at the same time, and having the drone move the camera for you. Doing the 3 things at the same time is usually very difficult to do at a constant rate. One other very cool movement that you can do with this is when you just fly over an object, select it first, and you're gonna have the drone just tilting the camera down very slowly the moment you approach it. Now on to the next part, let's talk about the active track properly, and here it's much more of a thrill. Now after choosing this one, you're gonna have 2 different options, trace and parallel. On the trace mode, the drone is going to follow you from behind, giving this third-person view perspective. You can adjust the distance and the height, and the drone will do its best to keep up with you, but doing very smooth movements. In the parallel option, you're gonna see the drone trying to follow you in a parallel path. So keeping roughly the distance and trying to follow more or less the same route as you're doing, but sideways. And probably this is the one that I like the most, creating some very cinematic shots while following someone or something just sideways and showing the action. But on both of them, you're gonna have to be a little bit careful with obstructions along the way. In the case of the Air 2S, for example, there's no sideways sensors, so you're gonna have to count on the front and the rear sensors to detect something that is kinda in the path on the side, to avoid, especially when it's flying in the parallel mode, to hit some kind of branches or whatever that can be in the way.
So there's one trick here. The drone is totally following me sideways. So
And the catch here is that probably you won't be looking at the drone, otherwise the shot's just not gonna look cool. So ideally, you're gonna have to check the path before, or even do a trial run manually to be sure that no problem is gonna happen. The trace mode especially is more aggressive, trying to follow you perfectly along the path you're doing. The advantage here is that it will almost always be flying forwards, so you can use the forward sensor to avoid trouble. But the important thing to watch here is not even that the drone might crash into something, but more that it might stop for a while because there's some obstruction in front of it. And if you configure it to go around an object, it's gonna try to do that. But now your footage is not gonna be useful because it's just gonna be with these stop and goes all the time. But of course, if you're doing a longer path that you just want to extract some small pieces, this is perfect because the drone is just going to follow you, doesn't matter what happens. Regarding the tracking itself, it does a very good job of keeping up with a person, especially if there's a strong contrast like in this case here for example. But whenever there's an obstruction for more than a couple of seconds, you see that it already loses track of the subject and it takes it back later on, but then that part of the footage doesn't look smooth anymore. Check out this piece here where I run in the middle of these olive trees and the drone managed to still catch me and continued on filming, but all that part just looks a little bit jittery and strange. One extra comment of something that I really liked was the smooth movement in the beginning and in the end of the filming. So whenever I started running or stopped, the drone wouldn't just like stop out of a sudden. It would just accelerate or slow down the movement to try to create something a little bit smoother. One extra thing to point out is that in all of these modes mentioned so far, you can always adjust the drone position in the middle to be sure that it's in the perfect height or perfect distance to you. It will just stop if you hit stop properly or if it loses connection with the controller, and then it will just begin the return to home procedure. And finally, we have point of interest, which is something that you could do manually by using the spotlight feature, but this is a little bit more precise. In this one, you're going to choose the target and then in which direction and at what speed do you want the drone to circle around it. When you have spotlight mode on and you just hit sideways, it's going to do something very similar, keeping the distance to the target and just circling around it. But in this case, to be very precise about the speed at which you are rotating around the target, you have to keep the stick always in the same position. And unless you're a very expert pilot, the only way that you can keep the stick in the same position is if it's in center or all the way to the side. And then like that, you're stuck with the maximum speed the drone can get to in Cine, Normal and Sport modes. Instead, in the point of interest, you can just slide it sideways and choose. The more you put it to the far side, the faster it's going to rotate in that direction, and you can always adjust it during the movement. Now just remember that the same thing applies here. Since this drone doesn't have a side sensor, this can be a little bit dangerous unless you look around first to be sure that you can use it. Alright guys, let me know in the comments which of these modes are you using the most or which ones you think are gonna be more useful to you and what do you want me to test next. And if you wanna watch something else interesting about drones, check out this video over here in which I tell you all the best settings for recording video with your DJI drone. Alright, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao ciao!